Alright, so now we're going to talk briefly about oceanic landforms. Three we're going to cover are continental shelves, seamounts, and goyots, as well as atolls and coral reefs. Continental shelf is a fairly flat extension of the continent under the ocean in the coastal area. It is, again, the submerged edge of a continent. It is continental crust, but the sea level is high enough to submerge the fringe, or in the case of New Zealand, most of that continental plate. And they are largest along passive tectonic margins, rather than say an oceanic trench, where usually the continental shelf is quite small. And continental shelves end at a continental slope and a continental rise. And this, don't let this diagram deceive you too much, because continental slopes have a grade of only around 5, maybe a maximum of 10%. So this looks quite steep, but really it's more like that. These slopes are fairly gradual. And the continental rise would have a grade of somewhere less than 2%. So very gradual transition from ocean to continent. Seamounts are undersea volcanoes that are still active but haven't reached the surface. Goyots are volcanoes that did at one point reach the surface but have since been flattened out by wave action. So they have a flat top. They're like a flat top seamount. Atolls were once volcanic islands that were above the surface in a tropical area and thus were surrounded by a coral reef. However, at some point in time, the volcano stopped being active and subsided. But as the volcano subsided, the coral reef kept growing upwards, because that's what reefs do. And the result is this ring-shaped island that encircles a central lagoon where the volcano once was, but is no more. These are very vulnerable due to climate change. They're not the strongest against wave action. They, of course, the coral may have trouble keeping up with the pace of sea level rise in the future, especially in light of things like coral bleaching. They're vulnerable to storm events, and also they are generally hard to live on because they lack a lot of fresh water and vegetation. Coral reefs are shallow due to the growth of the reef, and also have to be, the area where a coral reef grows has to be can't be too deep, or else the photosynthetic bacteria that live in the coral and form a symbiotic relationship with the coral, they need sunlight. So the water can't be too deep. It also can't be too turbid or murky, which is why you usually don't get coral in river deltas. They form in temperatures of around 20 degrees Celsius, and they have to be, again, fairly sunny. There are various types of reefs. There's a fringing reef that's attached to a coast, and a barrier reef, which is much further offshore. If you think of the Great Barrier Reef, Florida Keys, there's a reef around Belize. All good examples of barrier reefs.